It was supposed to be just another quiet night. She'd finished her shift, locked her door, and drifted into sleep, safe in her own home. But at 2 a.m., the world outside exploded. Flashlights, boots, shattered glass, voices yelling her name like a threat, not a call for help. Within seconds, her safe place turned into a war zone, and she had no idea why. But what those officers saw next froze every one of them in silence, because they just kicked down the wrong door of the wrong woman that it was supposed to be just another quiet night. She'd finished her shift, locked her door, and drifted into sleep, safe in her own home. But at 2 a.m., the world outside exploded. Flashlights, boots, shattered glass, voices yelling her name like a threat, not a call for help. Within seconds, her safe place turned into a war zone, and she had no idea why. But what those officers saw next froze every one of them in silence, because they just kicked down the wrong door of the wrong woman. By all accounts, Danielle Harris lived a quiet, disciplined life. A 32-year-old forensic analyst with the FBI, she'd work her way up from the bottom. Late nights, double shifts, endless reports. Her neighbors knew her as polite, soft-spoken, and always the one reminding kids to lock their bikes and get home before dark. She wasn't rich, but she had built something she was proud of: peace. That night, her apartment was a small island of calm. A candle burned on her kitchen counter, the faint hum of her laptop filling the silence as she reviewed one last file before bed. Her walls were lined with framed photos, graduation, her badge, and her mother smiling beside her in front of the bureau's emblem. Each one a reminder of how far she'd come. Outside, though, the world was not so calm. A storm brewed in the distance, thunder low and impatient. And somewhere, across town, a police radio crackled with a wrong address. As Danielle turned off the lights and drifted to sleep, she couldn't have known that her name, her apartment number, and her race were about to collide in a way that would make headlines and question everything she believed about justice. The first crash came like thunder, followed by a second that sent Danielle bolt upright in bed. For a split second, she thought it was the storm. But the next sound wasn't thunder, it was her front door giving way. Voices shouted. Boots pounded against the floor. Her heart exploded in her chest as she stumbled from the bed, still half asleep, half confused. Police. Hands where we can see them. The words tore through the dark, slicing the quiet she'd built her whole life around. Danielle froze, hands trembling in the air. The only light came from her alarm clock, 2:04 a.m. She'd done nothing wrong. No one she knew had done anything wrong. So why were there 5 officers storming through her hallway with guns drawn like she was a fugitive? Wait, please, what's happening? She managed to say, but her voice was drowned beneath orders and metal clattering to the floor. One of them kicked open her bedroom door. Another yanked open her drawers. A third shouted, "Clear!" As if her small one-bedroom apartment were a war zone. Danielle's mind spiraled. Had she been targeted? Mistaken identity? She worked with law enforcement, for God's sake. She'd taken an oath to uphold the law, to bring truth to cases that others ignored. And yet, here she was, on her knees, hands shaking, face pressed to the cold floor of her own home. She could feel the gun aimed at her back. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. One wrong word, one twitch, and she knew it could end her life. She tried again, voice cracking. "I'm an agent. Please, check my ID. It's in the kitchen drawer." But no one listened. The lead officer barked something about a suspect matching description, and another muttered, "Just secure the perimeter." And then, a moment of silence. One of the officers turned toward the wall and froze. There, framed beside her college diploma, hung her FBI jacket. The gold letters glimmered faintly in the flashlight's beam. Beneath it, her bureau badge, her credentials, everything that proved she wasn't who they thought she was. "Hold on," the officer whispered, his voice suddenly tight. The room went still. Another flashlight followed his gaze. Then another. The lead officer's jaw clenched. His voice, now lower, carried an unease he couldn't hide. "Everyone, stand down." But the damage was already done. Danielle was still on the floor, her wrists sore, her breath uneven. No one offered a hand. No one apologized. Only the sound of boots retreating down the hall and the faint hum of the storm outside filling the silence they left behind. As the door creaked shut behind them, she sat there for a long moment, barefoot, trembling, staring at the shattered frame of her own piece. And though they had left, their words, their stares, and their silence echoed louder than the storm itself. Because in that silence, Danielle finally understood. To them, she wasn't an agent first. She was a black woman. Morning light crept through the cracks of her blinds, painting the walls that had seen too much. Danielle hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flashlights, the guns, and the fear. She'd spent years investigating crimes, never imagining one day she'd be the victim. When she finally walked into the precinct later that morning, every step felt heavier than the last. The same officers she'd trained beside looked away. Whispers followed her down the hall. One man muttered, "Are you sure you're in the right building?" Another laughed under his breath. But she kept walking, straight to the Internal Affairs office. She laid her report on the desk, the forced entry, the unlawful raid, and the humiliation. The officer behind the desk skimmed through it, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up and said, almost casually, mistakes happen. They were just doing their job. Danielle's throat tightened. Just doing their job. Breaking down her door at 2 a.m. Aiming guns at her while she slept. Ignoring her badge, her voice, and her humanity. Her hands trembled as she reached into her folder and pulled out the photo of her wall, her FBI jacket still hanging beneath the shattered frame. "This," she said quietly, "is what doing their job looks like to you." The room fell silent. For a moment, no one spoke. No one moved. The truth sat heavy between them, undeniable and ugly. Danielle realized then, this wasn't just about her apartment. It wasn't even about that night. It was about a system that could look straight into the face of one of its own, and still only see the color of her skin. As she turned to leave, her voice shook, but not from fear. "This won't disappear in paperwork," she said. "Not this time." And as the door closed behind her, the precinct felt colder than ever. Because deep down, every officer in that room knew. The story they tried to bury had just begun to rise. Days turned into weeks, but the echoes of that night never left Danielle's mind, or her walls. The door was replaced, the glass swept away, but every creak in the floor still made her flinch. She returned to work, silent and colder, a woman who once believed in justice now questioning whom it truly served. Her formal complaint was filed, reviewed, and quietly dismissed. Insufficient evidence, they said. No apology. No accountability. Just silence. The same silence that had filled her apartment after the raid. The same silence that swallowed every black voice forced to prove its innocence before being heard. But Danielle refused to disappear into that silence. She began to speak at community meetings, interviews, and conferences, telling her story not as a victim, but as a warning. "If it can happen to me," she'd say, "an agent with credentials on the wall, imagine those without them." Her words spread. People listened. Some denied it, some defended it, but others finally began to see. Because what happened in that small apartment wasn't just a mistake. It was a mirror. A reflection of a system where skin color still decides who's safe and who's suspect. And though her door was fixed, something deeper remained broken. The trust she once had in the badge she wore. Still, she kept that FBI jacket on the wall. Not as prideful. Not as anger. But as a reminder, that silence protects no one. And stories like hers must be told, again and again, until the system learns to listen. Because for every Danielle, there are hundreds more we'll never hear about. The question isn't if it will happen again. The question is how many more doors have to break before the truth finally does.